that's where there's maybe a little bit of faith that comes in, and that's what you talk about in your blog as well. Like, if in 10 years nothing has happened, but you made progress by your own accord, will it have been worth it? And so that's this question of, are you intrinsically motivated?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that is really where it's at. And I mean, I think we're landing squarely in the territory of, I think, another one of the questions you had, which is, it reminded me, I think you called it maybe terror management, something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
Maybe it was a bit exaggerated, but
yes and no. I mean, because you hit the nail on the head. Like, right, this is hard. Right? This is really, really hard, and it's really competitive. And I really do think it requires people, when they're getting into it, to ask themselves seriously a couple of questions and to answer honestly, right? And the one is the one you just mentioned, which is, if all of this doesn't work out, and you can put some sort of benchmark in the future, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, and you're not bound to that, but just for the sort of thought experiment value of it, if at some point 10 years from now this hasn't worked out according to like what I define success to be, will it have been worth it? And that question is, it's not easy to answer, and it often requires a lot of introspection, but it also forces you to start really thinking about, like, what are the motivations getting people into this, which gets right back to that issue of sustainability that we sort of started off with, in a way. Because if you're not going about this in a manner where you have had some exposure and some breadth, and then you make some sort of realizations about yourself, and you go further, and you start to decide what interests you, and sorry, just tangentially for a second, I think there was this article I found in the Atlantic Monthly called "Find Your Passion is Really Terrible Advice," and I actually loved it, because their point was essentially what I made with talking about excruciating joy. Like, but passion makes it sound like this is all going to be fun, and like we musicians just sit there every day, like reveling in the beauty of our own sound and like doing all this stuff, and like, my God, no, it is far from it. Like, it is often a slog, and it is hard, and it is long hours, and your body hurts, and all of this stuff. But it's the kind of rewarding work that, I feel in the same way if I do like a really long hike at high altitude, right? My legs are tired, and my feet hurt, and my lungs are burning, but man, the view is amazing, and I'm glad I did it. And so, having that kind of sense about why you're doing what you're doing is what can help you answer that question honestly. Like, yeah, if this all doesn't work out, it's still going to have been worth it. It will still be worth the time. It's sort of like, if you go on a big hike, and you come down and like you sprain your ankle in like the last half a mile, like, was the hike still worth it? And you're like, well, okay, yeah, you can't always control what happens, and maybe that means you're not going to get to go on another hike for another 6 months, but like, it was still a good hike. It was still a beautiful view, right?
Yeah.
I think about this metaphor a lot of times when encountering like Strauss's Alpine Symphony, right? It's like the most literal sort of musical example of this idea. And like in the Alpine Symphony, there's a thunderstorm, and you get wet and you're cold, and it's not comfortable. So like this is the thing, I think, that most effectively confronts that sort of terror management idea that you talked about. Because for the people who are gripped by this, who have this existential dread about, oh my God, like, what if this doesn't work out? The answer is, you've dealt with that problem already. Like, you've already accepted that it might not, right? And you've thought about it a lot, and you've got some contingency plans, and you're setting up this process so that you can do this for the long haul. One of the other things I've recently begun focusing a lot more in my teaching with like early college age and even high school students is thinking about this basic reality. At least here in the US, I think way too many music education programs at universities and conservatories, they don't do nearly enough to prepare people for the realities that are going to confront them when they're out of school. Which is to say, you finish a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or you even stick around for an artist diploma or some sort of certificate or something like that. And, you're done with school then when you're like 23, 24, 25, something like that. And great. Then what? Right. And as soon as I got to the Met, I ended up overseeing this sort of internal study that we did where we asked the members of our orchestra 2 questions. And it was, how old were you when you won your audition for the Metropolitan Opera? And how many auditions had you taken at that point? And, unsurprisingly, like happens with surveys like this, you get results that essentially form kind of a bell curve. And you've got outliers on either end. And on the high end, people had taken, 45, 50 auditions and won the job in their 50s. Like, wow, okay, that's tenacity. On the low end, yeah, there were a couple people that won jobs like either straight out of school or while they were in school. It's not that doesn't happen, but it's that is by far an outlier. It is rare. It is not the thing you can count on. And yet, so many people proceed through school as if they're counting on that happening, right? And I'll ask students this all the time. I'm like, great, so what are your plans for after graduation? They're like, well, I'm going to just audition and win a job. It's like, are you? I mean, on average, there's going to be a 4 to 8 year gap in there between when you finish school and you've refined your process enough to win a job, right? And this is not an accident in a way, right? Because like the field continues to get much, much more competitive, and it takes longer to get to the level that you need to be at to be technically and musically competitive in this. Auditioning itself is its own skill. It takes a while to get used to that. And, it's just going to take time. And so the question I want to get my students asking themselves as early on as possible is that, again, accepting that this might not work out, which is not defeatist. It's just, confronting reality as it is. And accepting that even if this does work out, it's still going to be likely a multi-year gap between the time I'm done in school and, when I'm good enough and competitive enough to win an audition. So what's my plan? like what am I going to do in the meantime? Right. I think of school as sort of like the research and development lab in a way for your musical training, where like you come up with a prototype, but then you like emerge out into the world and you're like, oh crap. Okay. Now we have to like alpha test this and beta test this and actually get a product that's usable. And that's what you need to bring to an audition. And that's frankly what we're listening for behind the screen is, are you not just like a skilled student, but like a mature, complete musician package, right? And so the question then is like, great, so you're planning to go to school, but then what are you also going to be doing for the 2 to 4 to 8 years after that? And it's just really astonishing to me how few people have given that part really, really serious thought. Because, when I press people on it, they're like, yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, I still might need to like keep improving and practicing when I'm out of school, but yeah, I'll figure out a way to do that. And I'm like, okay, but how? Like, what are you going to do? Again, you're going to need to pay the rent somehow, right? And like maybe you have really generous parents, or you have a trust fund, or you can just like live in their basement for 10 years or something. But like that's again not the norm. So what's the plan? And it's actually the more I've been teaching and seeing this same problem manifested throughout a generation of younger players, it's made me really reflect upon and appreciate my own experience, which is that at the time, like I thought I was at a major disadvantage because I had this other job and this like other career. And I was like, oh my God, like I feel kind of distracted by this. Maybe I'm just like not going to be competitive at these auditions. Oh, what am I doing? And, there was a lot of sort of existential doubt and agony and all this other stuff. And yet, my God, like in retrospect, I had a huge advantage going into that because I had a way to make my process sustainable. I could do it for as long as I needed to, right? And I think a lot of the terror management that comes into this is people imposing some sort of arbitrary deadline on themselves, saying like, well, if I haven't won an audition after 30 auditions, or if I haven't won something by the time I turned 30, I'm giving it all up and I'm going back and getting an MBA or doing something totally different. And to me, that's just like, I don't get that at all. That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, especially considering that this field continues to get more and more competitive, and like that quote unquote finish line, or, you know, the period where you can actually support yourself with your music making, that line is just going to keep getting further and further away from school. And, you know, so it just seems totally insane to me that you'd like impose an arbitrary threshold and then use that threshold to freak yourself out constantly. I think it's much more useful to think about, okay, what can I do to make my process of improving as beneficial and sustainable as possible? And if that involves, you know, having a different form of employment, several different forms of employment, doing a couple of different things, but making sure that, you know, your income is coming from places that still provide you time and space and mental bandwidth to practice, you know, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see how intent you are on bridging that gap between the reality and. And
look, I mean, like I'm gonna say some stuff now that's like not going to be popular with school administrators, but that's the nice thing about the path I took. Like I have no debt to them. Right? Like I didn't go to a conservatory. I don't owe them anything. It's fine. And I think this cuts the same way in both Europe and the US. The reason the system is like this is that it is not in a music school's business model or best interest to be fully honest about this, right? Like if on the application materials it said, warning, only 5% of you are going to actually do this. Like, you know, there would be a lot fewer people applying. There has to be like a certain amount of sort of optimistic delusion that gets people into this. But I also feel like one of my roles now, and one of the things I want to do in my teaching and writing and everything else, is sort of act as a helpful filter and a little dose of reality. It's not that I want people to quit music. Far from it. I want a lot of people to be involved in music. What I want, though, is for the ones who really decide to make a commitment, like a multi-year, you know, decades-long commitment to the performing arts. I would like those people to be the thoughtful ones, the introspective ones, the ones who have asked themselves the question, if this all doesn't work out, is it still, you know, will it have been worth it anyway? I think the field is going to be better off. I think individual human beings will be better off. And again, the problem is that it's not in schools or conservatory programs' best interests to get people asking those questions. They need to fill their roles. They need to meet their minimum enrollment guidelines. They have bills to pay. They have teachers to pay. And so their priority is keep people coming into the school and paying tuition and get them degrees. And then after that, it's not their problem. And that is not a helpful or, you know, reality-based way to look at what a music career is going to be like. And, you know, the thing is, you don't have the same issue with MBA programs. You don't have the same issues with law degrees, right? And this is simply because, like, musicians have this, again, this sort of like passion part of it. It might be excruciating joy, but there is this thing where we're like, art is important to us. There's this thing about, you know, great works of music from all these different centuries that reflects something about being human and helps us like contextualize our place in the world. And this speaks to us and is attractive to us in ways that, like, you know, reams of like mind-numbing jurisprudence or like financial mergers just isn't. And so you don't have, you know, 10 to 20 times as many people applying for law degrees as there are jobs available. You don't have that same problem with MBAs. And, you know, so those schools don't have to deal with that. Well, that's the situation we face in the performing arts. And, you know, the schools are not going to police themselves. There's never going to be a point where, you know, major music schools and conservatories are saying, well, you know, the jobs just, you know, are not so plentiful out there, so we're only accepting 5% of the people that applied this year. Like it's not going to happen. And so it's really on the individual to make these decisions for themselves, to kind of look at it clear-eyed, to understand what they're getting themselves into, to, you know, be real about it, and then think about what this process is going to look like in the long term. I'll sometimes have these parts of classes I teach where I just take young musicians and I run them through the statistics, right? And the statistics, start off with saying things like, okay, there's roughly 7 to 10,000 music performance degrees granted in the United States every year. Okay, fine. So that's like this pool of people out there against whom you are nominally competing, and then you've got that pool. But of course, it's not just the people in that pool. You've also got the people from last year's pool and the people from the pool before that. And so it's informing this idea of like how truly competitive this thing is, and it's. Oh, and then I walk them through, so you've got these like tens of thousands of people in the United States. You've got, for instance, 52 ICSOM orchestras, and in the U.S., these are the orchestras that essentially pay a living wage. It's it's enough money to live on, and you get health benefits, that kind of thing. And with 52 of these orchestras, round up to like roughly 100 people per orchestra. That's a stretch, but still, that's like 5,200 positions. And if you assume that an average length of career is about 30 years, that means that there's only 173 openings per year. But you've also got 7,000 people joining this pool that's increasingly growing from 7,000 to 14,000 to 28,000 to like 60,000 people. And like these statistics can be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
But, and this is the big but, and this is the really important part, I'm telling them this not to freak them out. I bring this up because it's the same thing I think about when I'm at the Grand Canyon, for instance. I don't know if you've ever been, but in the middle of Arizona, we have like the biggest canyon in the world, right? And you go up to the edge of that, and there's all these warning signs, and don't get too close to the edge, don't do this, And one of the biggest ones is do not attempt to hike down to the Colorado River and back in one day. It's too dangerous. It's too far. It's easy to go down. It's much harder to get back up. And you will probably have to be helicoptered out. You'll get heat stroke. You'll get like heat exhaustion, something. Don't do it. Of course, nevertheless, every day, every year, there are people who show up unprepared, overconfident, not understanding their own preparation or their weaknesses or anything else. And they go down and they get themselves into trouble. And they might be, 23-year-old guys in their peak physical prime, and still they're getting choppered out of the Grand Canyon because they had no idea what they're doing. By contrast, when I was doing a hike there, I saw people in their 80s who were really well prepared, and they did the work, and they were deliberate about it, and they had all the right gear, and they were taking their time, and they were just fine. Right? And so to me, it is really like sort of the ultimate living metaphor of this whole concept that like, yeah, you want to know what you're getting yourself into, but you also know that like this pool of people is not all the same. Like it's actually a fairly small number of people who are going to be disciplined and who are going to be organized and who are going to take the long view and set themselves up to be competitive over a long time, and who are going to make the kinds of choices that will be, increasingly putting them at an advantage, and who are going to really do the work. And so you don't necessarily have to be terrified of the fact that there's like tens of thousands of people competing for these small number of positions when you recognize that it is totally within your power to make the decisions and form your process to be the one of the people that has a really good shot at it.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to approach this, because as you said, that is both honest and there's a silver lining there.
Yeah. Well, and like me Jason, too, the silver lining is like, I like to hike. So you'll have a good time along the way no matter what.